been a number of years ago that I actually watched that dirt bike high jump. While I was flipping through the channels, it was like X Games, and I'm like, normally I wouldn't watch the high jump, but putting it on a dirt bike made it a little bit more interesting. And besides, I like competition, so being able to see something lived out in competition. Now, it's not just about watching competition. For me, it's competing. I will do just about anything for the benefit of being bigger and better than somebody else. And I know that that's true in so many of our lives. We do a lot of dumb things that we wouldn't otherwise do for the sake of competition. And my background is youth ministry, and I happen to know from experience as well that middle school students will do about anything that you put them up to if there are some bragging rights on the table, if there's this element of being bigger and better than somebody else, or that they, by peer pressure, do not want to fall victim to not actually participating. The high school students are a little bit different. They care what everybody thinks about them. But the middle school students, they don't care what anybody thinks about them, and they'll just do crazy stuff. And so I think that deep down inside of each of us is this little bit of a middle school student trying to get out, and we do some dumb things for the sake of doing it bigger or better than somebody else. Can you think of something in your life, this is an audience participation time, that you did just because you wanted to one-up somebody else? Anything that you've done now, keep it PG. What's one thing that you've done to one-up other people? Come on, you're better than that. CJ's like, how do I narrow it down? Somebody said something over here. Bull riding. That would do it. What else we got? That's it? Cowards. I know that for me, I don't even like video games, but I'll play video games just to beat somebody else's score. That's the only reason I'm playing, is just to one-up the person next to me. It's somebody that I know. And I'll just dedicate hours to trying to perfect that so that I can beat them. I would even do the same with a claw machine. Anybody fans of claw machines? I will go through some cash to get a prize I don't want just because I need to beat the machine. And I think that there's something just deeply ingrained into us to have this little element of competition. And we saw that in the last series, Follow Me, that Jesus had a way of raising the bar, elevating the competition. But it was really much more about, not the competition element as much as the commitment piece. Not the competition, but the commitment. So he told his disciples, hey, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. But in Luke 9, he raised the bar and he told the people that wanted to follow after him, if you're going to follow me, then you have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross daily and follow after me. Not just in the things that you say, but actually in your life, to actually follow after me and do the things that I do. He raised the bar. But that's not the only place that Jesus raised the bar. So in this series, we're going to take a look at one of the sermons that Jesus gave. And it's referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And so over the next 5 weeks, we're going to take a look at different elements of this Sermon on the Mount and how Jesus continually raises the bar. Again, not out of competition, but out of commitment. And so another way to kind of illustrate this for you, when my kids were younger and they were learning how to swim, I would stand in the pool and they would be against the side. And I would just say, okay, come to Dad. And so they would swim a little bit. And the next time, whenever they put their head under the water, Dad goes like this. And guess what? Once they figure that out, Dad does another one of these. That's another way that we raise the bar because we're expecting growth in their process. It's not just swimming that we do that, right? But we do that with kids. If you're a teacher of any kind of magnitude, you understand this idea of raising the bar, getting people, students, to continue to grow in whatever it is that you're trying to teach them to do. And Jesus wants us to grow. He wants to raise the bar for us. But that's just the what. Okay, you and I, we don't respond very well if somebody just gives us a what. The question that we respond with is the why. Okay, so I see that Jesus is going there, but why do I need to go there? Why does that matter to me? Why do I need to do anything about that? Because if that's just one more thing for me to do, then I'm out. If that's just one more thing to occupy my time or my resources, I don't want any part of it. But if I can understand the why, then that's going to give me a little extra motivation to accomplish the what. And then all along the way, we need to worry about the how. It doesn't do us any good if we know the why, and we even know the end game, but we don't know the how we're going to get there. And so in the first part of this Sermon on the Mount, I believe that Jesus kind of lays out this plan of action for us. And we're going to start today with the why. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, page 810. Page 810 in the Bibles we provide, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. So Jesus says this, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the salt of the earth." This is the why. Okay? So what does salt do? It's a preservative. So if you want food to last longer, you put some salt on it to preserve it. We don't do that as much today because we have refrigeration and things like that. But at that point in time, they would have used it a lot. But it's also used to flavor things. It's a flavor enhancer. It boosts the natural flavors within things. And so you and I are the flavor enhancers of the world. You and I are the preservatives of the world. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? Let's do a little chemistry lesson here. So I don't think that we probably have too many chemistry majors in here that are going to balk at this, but salt is sodium chloride, two elements joined together. Now they have a pretty tight bond. So a couple things that you'll notice about them is they're not easily separated. And number two, they don't easily attach to other things. You can mix them with other things, but they don't easily attach with other things. So you could throw some salt in a container with other things, and you're probably going to have these little granules of salt inside of there that's permeated the batch, but is not dissolved within it, unless there is water, because salt, sodium chloride, is highly dissolvable. Right? So you can put it in water, and it will dissolve into the water. So two things in reality, even though sodium chloride is not technically lose its saltiness, two things that you can do to make it lack its power. Number one is you mix it with other contaminants. So you and I, which are supposed to be salt of the earth, can actually become ineffective if we get mixed in with a bunch of impurities. Now, we don't have to try very hard at that. We kind of create our own impurities within our own life. But then we go out and we mix it with other impurities in the world. And this thing that's supposed to be prominent in the world is actually made insignificant to the point it needs to be thrown out simply because we've become diluted in the context of all of these other contaminants. But we also get ineffective and diluted if we become too watered down. You see, the wrong chemicals can make us dangerous, if not deadly. Not just to other believers, but to the world around us that we're supposed to be shining the light of Christ. But when we become watered down, we become ineffective too. It's like we confess Christ. We identify in the waters of baptism. We say that we want Him to make us new again, and we leave exactly the same way that we entered in. And when you and I do that, when we leave the same way, we're ineffective. In order to make a difference, you and I have to be different than the world around us. And if we're not different, we don't stand out. And then it's what's the value? What's the value of that? And so Jesus, when He raises the bar, the what, we need to understand the why, because He wants us to be different. He wants us to be agents of change. He wants us to be different so that we can be difference makers. There's something else that you should understand about salt. At least in my home, it exists inside of a container there on the dining room table. And if I get a meal in that needs a little flavor boost, and I never take the salt out of the container, it never enhances the flavor of the food. And so if you and I, as believers in Christ, always stay within the container, the church, the walls, we never really enhance those around us. So to be really effective, we have to be a church without walls. We have to go into the community. And that's really part of our DNA, who we are, to go into the community so that Christ can be made known in our attitudes and actions. That same thought process is carried on in the next paragraph, verse 14. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. You don't light a lamp and stick it under another object. It's going to hide it. You don't put the salt inside of the shaker and never let it out, right? You don't hide this, but you let it shine for everybody to see. Now, there's a little element that I think you and I would probably identify with. If you've ever been around a light at night, you see the bugs are just like they're attracted to it. Something about it just just makes them go literally all bug-eyed. And they're like, ah. They get drawn into this light. If you got one of those bug zappers, it's like music to your ears. Right? But you and I do exactly the same thing. Let me illustrate. When we moved into our last community, there was a light shining around, and it was just this rotating light, like you'd see at an airport. And I was a little confused because, to the best of my knowledge, there's not an airport where this light was coming from. So I didn't know. Now, I was a bit lazy, so I didn't go chase down the light, but I did ask a friend the next day. So I've been seeing this light. It's strobing around. I don't see a bat signal, so I'm guessing it's not a Batman thing. But where is this light located at and what it's there for? And so they told me, hey, that's actually the location of the casino. So Jackpot Junction Casino has got this big light. It strobes around. Why? Because just like bugs do a zapper, I want to go check that out. I want to go see what that's all about. What's this light over here? And maybe not a casino for you, but we have some other flashing lights that happen around. They exist on ambulances and fire trucks and police cars. And guess what? We see those lights go by, and you and I are like, what's going on? And it's not always physical, because we live in kind of a social media kind of world. Somebody posts online, hey, I saw these lights over by this area. What's going on over there? And you know what happens in this social media world? Everybody else goes, yeah, what's going on? We do it. But let me change the focus a little bit. If you and I are the lights of the world, guess what happens when we shine brightly? People think, what's going on over there? What's happening over there? But that only happens if you and I are willing to be different. Because in order to be a difference maker, you and I actually have to be different than the world around us. And so when Jesus is raising the bar, He's challenging you and I to be different so that we can be difference makers. He's challenging you and I to live a life that is completely different than the world, because the world is described as darkness, and we're called out of the darkness and into the light. And so the light, it dispels the darkness. The light allows you to see the things that trip you up in the darkness. And if we continue to look like everybody else, then you and I bring darkness to a world that's already dark. And what's the hope in that? And so there's a higher call for you and I. Philippians in chapter 2, the Apostle Paul writes a little bit more about these lights. He says in verse 14, it's on the screen here, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. You and I are to shine like lights in the world, but the only way that happens is if we're different than the crooked and twisted generation that we're surrounded by. That doesn't mean that we don't hang out with them. If you and I never hang out with those people, guess what? We just put the salt back in the container. We just put the light under a bowl. You see, there's really two ways that we make light ineffective. The number one thing that we do, you and I, to make ourselves ineffective for Christ is this, that we don't look and act different than the world that we're placed in. So we take darkness to darkness and it doesn't change anything. And that really doesn't allow the love of God to penetrate. The second thing that you and I do is that we keep the light in where the light's at. So both are wrong, right? Because you can be a church and you can be just passionately driven towards, hey, let's have some really great sermons. Let's dig in and read the Bible. We're going to have these prayer rallies and they're going to last for hours. And then we just continue to keep the light inside where there's already light. We are rendering ourselves ineffective. And if we go out, but we don't take the light with us, we too are ineffective. And it goes back to this idea of salt when it's thrown out and trampled upon. So they would harvest this salt from the salt marshes along the Dead Sea. You go to the Dead Sea, you get this, but there wasn't any kind of refineries around, so the sodium chloride was mixed in with a bunch of other elements. It was still beneficial, like it was a preservative, it was a flavor enhancer, but you had to be careful what it was mixed with. But every once in a while, that salt, sodium chloride, would be dissolved out of these other minerals. And what you would be left with is a substance that looked an awful lot like salt, but it didn't taste like salt and it didn't preserve like salt. And so what they would do with that salt-like substance is they would throw it out and it would become like gravel and they would walk upon it. And so when they're expressing this imagery at this point in time, as Jesus is talking to the people, they're like, oh yeah, that'd be bad. This stuff is good for nothing but to create a walking path. And when you and I become ineffective, we just get walked all over. And nothing good comes of that. I want to turn you back to Matthew chapter 5. And I want you to see the next little piece here. And in order to go next, I want to go actually before. Because I want to focus on the how. Jesus gives us these list of traits that we're to pursue after. They're called Beatitudes. Verse 2. And he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This blessed be is a word that means happy, to be favored. When you and I do these things, when we have these attitudes, then we'll be blessed by God. And all of these things, and we're going to read through them all here, we're going to see in these very few verses that Jesus completely takes this idea of success in the world and flips it upside down. And really, in an effort to raise the bar, he's lowered the bar. He's put it on the bottom shelf so everybody can reach it. But look at this. Blessed are the poor in spirit. You mean we don't have everything right? We don't have it all put together? Well, that's right? We all need God in our life. We all need more of God. We need more help along the way. But when we pretend like we got it all figured out, when we got this faith thing on lock, at that moment in time, we have rendered ourselves ineffective. Because we have no more room for Jesus in our life. But if we can lower the bar and we allow Jesus into our life, then we're going to be blessed because we're seeking for more. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. You know, when we pretend like we've got it all figured out, hey, I am good, I'm doing well, everything is great in my life, we don't have any room for outside help. But when we can admit that we're at the bottom and that we're hurting, that we're struggling, that's when we can really receive the help, and that's when we can be comforted. Blessed are those who are meek, for they shall inherit the kingdom of the earth. Meekness is this idea of power under control. This time of year, you can go into a lot of the farm and fleet type of stores and you can purchase baby chickens. These little chicks are just super, super fragile. And if you could take one of those farmers out there that's just got the grip of steel and they put one of those baby chickens in their hand, they could just squeeze it. But in order to palm this chicken, they have to be gentle, meek, power under control. You see again how Jesus is lowering this bar. You have the power, but you're restrained. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. It's not the hungering and the thirsting for things that are temporary, but things that are eternal. for righteousness, the things that are right in the eyes of God. And when we hunger out after the things that are right with God, then that's where the satisfaction comes from. Otherwise, you and I, our appetites just continue to grow, and we need more and we need better. Right? We continue to crave these things. And these are appetites that probably all of us have, these appetites to be comforted, the appetite to be satisfied. You and I enter in so many times with these longings, these hurts, and when we feel like we've got everything figured out, or we tell everybody we've got things figured out, our attitude is that of pride rather than that of humility. And we're not receiving the kind of assistance that we need. And so to be satisfied, we thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I think probably all of us realize that we make mistakes and we need a little bit of grace. We need some mercy in our life where somebody doesn't hold things against us. And so in order to receive that kind of mercy in our life, Jesus says that we have to extend it to other people. And maybe we have the right to hold them under the water. Maybe we have the right to just hold a grudge against them. But when we extend mercy to those people, it's then that God extends that mercy back to us. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall be able to see God. So to have a pure heart means that our motives are right. Right? All of these attitudes flow out of a pure heart, and these attitudes lead to our actions. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. There's three, I believe, types of people. One is the group of people that's like, oh, there's no controversy here? Watch this. And we go in and we stir things up just because we like to stir things up. We like to ruffle feathers. We like to see people kind of squirm a little bit. There's the other people over here on this extreme that are like, we need to have peace at all costs, so I'll sit back here, I'll shut my mouth, I'll just internalize everything, I'll address nothing, and so then there will not be controversy. But in the middle of this are the peacemakers, those who are willing to address hard things and difficult topics with people that they love or people that they don't know because they realize there's a bigger picture at place and there's more lives that depend upon it. And so we're willing to have the tough conversations so that we can reach the peace, because a peace that is false because we haven't addressed it is not peace at all. That's compromise. That's allowing somebody else to do the wrong thing simply because we don't want to go address that. And so that's not what we're talking about. So if we're willing to be peacemakers, then we can be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of God. You and I, if we pursue after these right attitudes that Jesus is giving to us, we can bet that we're going to be persecuted. It happened to Jesus. It happened to His disciples. It happened to the prophets in the Old Testament. And it will happen to us if we pursue after the righteousness of God. That's probably not good news for your standpoint. But listen to these words in the next couple verses. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad. What? They're persecuting me. How can I be glad in this? But listen, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Your reward is great in heaven. Delayed gratification, something that as Americans we're not very good at. Delayed gratifications means that I actually have to wait, and we want to be able to pay cash now and get it now. Better yet, we want to be able to pay with a card today, get it now, and delay those payments because we want the immediate gratification now. But if we can actually discipline ourselves for the long game, then the reward's going to be even greater. And the long game here for you and I is heaven. And we're going to be blessed by God. But some of those blessings are not going to be made known to us till we're in heaven, because we still have to live here among the darkness. We still have to shine like lights. But there's coming a day. And so I would say that that is the how. Because Jesus knew that if our actions are going to change, when He raises the bar. It's only going to happen because our attitudes change. He knew that our attitudes, not the actions, are the things that lead to change. Think about that for a moment. You walk in to work, first day of the week, whatever that is for you. For most, it's Monday. You're like, oh, it's Monday. I don't want to be here. And then you walk into that same place on Friday. You're like, yes, we got this. We're going to knock it out. We're going to experience the weekend. What's changed in both of those days? Attitude. Attitude. You and I control our attitude. And our attitude controls us and our actions. So regardless of what it is that you're facing, whatever challenges that come your way, the thing that changes our actions is actually our attitudes. And so we become less full of ourselves and more full of Christ. Blessed be the meek. Blessed be the merciful. We bring these attitudes into play. And guess what makes us stand out amongst the world that we're placed in? Guess what makes us shine like stars in the heaven, as it says in Philippians? Guess what makes us become the salt of the earth? That we're blessed to be different so we can be a difference maker happens because not that the environment has changed, but because our attitude is different. And so when cancer comes our way, when somebody gets hurt, whenever there's family problems, whenever there's financial issues, our attitude is completely different than the world around us because we have Jesus in it. And when we have Jesus in our life, it changes not the situation, but it changes the attitude. And when our attitude changes, our actions actually begin to change. Try that. Try to walk to work like it's a Friday instead of it's a Monday. And see if that doesn't impact your day a little bit different. And what about whenever you come out and you go, oh, TGIF. I'm thinking, don't live your whole work week for Friday because you're going to miss every other opportunity that comes up before then. And you have an opportunity to be salt and light in that workplace every other day. Quit wishing it away. But be that. Be the agent of change. You have to be different to make a difference. And Jesus says in verse 17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. He also says in the book of Mark, in chapter 12, that all of the law is summarized in this: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as you love yourself. So I want you to think about this for a moment. So all of these laws given in the Old Testament, they all point to Jesus. All of the prophecies given in the Old Testament, every one of them, point to Jesus. And then in Jesus' statement about all of the law being summarized in love, He is fulfilling the entire law. His love is the only thing that fulfills all of the law. And so when He's saying in this moment that all of the law up to this point, I'm not abolishing that, I'm here to fulfill it. Love is the intention. Love is the undercurrent, the foundation in which all of these things are built upon. And then when you and I, we live and love like Jesus, we allow His attitudes to become our attitudes, and then those actions then permeate out of those attitudes when we raise those bars, not because we have to on the outside, but we get to because of the internal attitudes on the inside. You and I begin to share that love of Christ with the people we come into contact with. And when you and I are extensions of that love of Jesus, then we also point back to Jesus. And so whether it's the laws and the prophets of the Old Testament or our lives lived out in the New Covenant, we all point back to Jesus. And when we fail to point to Jesus, we miss the gospel message. And we miss the why behind all of the attitudes and the behaviors. Because they're nothing without Jesus. We need to be different to make a difference. So what's your next step? Maybe it's to examine specifically your actions and go, am I actually different than the people I live with, the people I work with? And if you get a no, not so much, maybe take it a step deeper. What's my attitude like? Do I have the thoughts and the attitudes that Jesus would want me to have? Do I hunger and thirst for His righteousness? Do I put myself down so that He can be built up? And then I want to challenge you to do something else. I want you to dig into your Bible this week and read Matthew chapters 5 through 7. I want you to read through this Sermon on the Mount. And then join us again next week as we talk about some of these ways that Jesus was raising the bar.